All right, so this is an introduction to version 2 of my config helper tool. So this one is designed for OS 7, but it actually will also work for OS 6. So if you haven't seen the previous version, version 1, the idea behind this is a tool to both help brand new users with their config, but also to help experienced users or people who have used Proffi over a long time, just because of the number of options that have become available. And what I've done for version 2 is actually expanded and added a lot of features as well as a lot of new capabilities that make this a really helpful tool. At least I think so. So one of the things that I've noticed just being with Proffi for a long time is, particularly when new users come in or people who are first time getting used to it, the config always seems to trip people up, either just not understanding how to update it, what to do with it, how it works. And then also a lot of times there's syntax errors, which is really the purpose behind this tool, is to try to minimize the chance for syntax errors. But this also now makes it a little bit easier to do other things. And also kind of helps to guide people through the whole process just of everything possible with Proffi. So even the most experienced users may not keep up with all the updates that happen in all the different versions. And even within those versions, there's a lot of additional things that have been added, both defines, features, capabilities, ways to optimize your config, ways to fit more, ways to do more. So what I've done is I've tried to combine all that into a tool that will help new users and walk them through the process, as well as kind of give them the information they need to set their config up. But then also something that experienced users or people who are familiar with how to do a config with the features that maybe they're not familiar with. So there's a lot of new capabilities. So I'm probably going to have to do several videos to get more in depth on some of the stuff, but I'm going to glaze through this kind of as a starting point, as an introduction, particularly because this is brand new. So a lot of this is brand new stuff. So I do need some testing. There is going to be an alpha thread on the Crucible that will be linked here. So if you're using the tool, trying it out, anything at all that pops up, if you have a question, if you're not sure how something's supposed to work, if something isn't working how you think it should, if you get errors, whatever, just post in this thread here, and that'll help me kind of work through it. So I've done a lot of testing, but there's just so many scenarios possible that I couldn't have covered everything. So I'm kind of starting this out as a way to get people to test it, but it also should be really helpful and useful off the bat, except if any bugs pop up, which we'll address. So the first big change I made, for those of you who maybe used or tried out the first version, is I've made it so that this now has the ability to save your entries. So the original version was kind of a soft launch, an alpha test on this kind of bigger concept. And I know people were using it and it was helping people, but you had to do it all in one session. You had to fill the whole thing out, make all your choices, and then export your config, and then use it from there. So I've now made it so that this is able to store your entries. And I've made this so that on top of being able to store your entries, you can actually save 6 different configs. So the way I'm doing it kind of limits how many I can get away with. So 6 was kind of a starting point. And I think that's a good amount of configs for most users. Those who have a lot more savers, basically all you'd have to do really is just use a different browser. So this is going to save in what's called local storage, which is based on your browser. So that means when you start entering it, your local browser is going to hold on to that information for you. So when you come back, it's there. What that means is, obviously, if you go to a different computer, if you wipe out local storage on your browser, if you launch a different browser on your computer, that information isn't there. So it's not storing it anywhere externally. It's actually stored within your browser. So technical stuff, but just so you know, if you do all this work, like, in Chrome, and then you come back later to the same computer, but you happen to open, Edge or Firefox, and that information is not there, it's because it's stored locally to your browser. But that gives us a lot more capability. So what this now will do is you can build your config slowly. So you can do a little bit today, you do a couple presets, set everything up, and then, go about your business, come back later in the day, come back the next day, come back a week later, come back months later, and it should still all be there. And this also now kind of lets me help users move through the versions by having this. So if you set up a config in OS 6 with this tool, and then you want to eventually move to OS 7 when it releases, or if you're doing alpha testing now, obviously that's part of the help with this tool, is getting into OS 7. But you can move forward, and it will allow you to take what you have in your old config and just move it forward into the next version. and then add features, add new capabilities, etc. Backwards compatibility is a lot different. So if you started in this tool with an OS 7 config and then you tried to go backwards to OS 6, you basically have to redo a lot of stuff. So you can always kind of move forward through, and that's just how the OS works. You can always move forward. If you're in OS 5, you can move to OS 6 with your config. If you're in OS 6, you can move to OS 7 with your existing config. But if you have an OS 7 config and you tried to use it in OS 6, it's not going to work. So that being said, let me kind of give you, this is going to be a really brief run through, and it's going to be a longer video, but it's going to be a brief run through just because there is so much that's in here. So we can do multiple configs. I'm going to start with just one. And now you're going to give your config a name. Because we can save up to 6, and because you want to be able to identify it, I've made it so that you can name your config. So for the first purpose here, I'm going to just call this my fallen config. Helps if I type right. All right. And what you're going to see is now this little button, this is going to be your way to navigate. So if I add other configs, the names are going to be visible up here, but it's going to use this name going forward, as well as when you create the export file, which we'll get to. You can choose your OS version. So you can do OS 6. It will do all the OS 6 stuff. Or if you're in alpha, or now we're technically in beta of OS 7, you would be able to select that here. So we'll go with OS 7 for now. And then you're going to choose your board if you have anything other than a 2.2. Almost everybody nowadays, especially if you have a brand new board, it's going to be a 2.2. The version 3 board is technically only prototyped right now. But if you have an older board, you can switch to the teensy, or you can switch to the 1.5. But if you're unsure, the board has it printed on it, or if you have a recent one, it's most likely a 2.2. But that is obviously has to be correct if you put the wrong info in. So now this is the most important thing, and this is I've improved how the tool works, but it still really relies on you having an existing config or building at least the start point of an accurate config. So the blade config section of your config file, if you got a Sabre from an installer, the installer should be providing you with a copy of that config. If they're not, they first of all don't understand how Proffi works. Second of all, they have to provide it to you. It's one of the requirements with open source. So you have to request it, because that blade config, it basically tells, it's included in the config file to explain how your Sabre is wired up, what's wired to it, and where it, basically what types of blades it supports, etc., as well as some other information. So without the blade config, you really can't go anywhere. So you're going to need that. So if you have an existing config, you would open it up. So I usually use Sublime Text, but it would just be like a notepad. You don't want to use like a word processing program, because they do weird things with characters. But you're going to scroll all the way. So I have mine open already. I'm cheating. But at the very bottom of your existing config, you're basically just looking for this section. So it'll start with blade config like this, and it'll end with a bracket and a semicolon. This is the most important piece of information from your config in order for you to move into the tool and have the tool work correctly. If you don't have this information, there are ways to get it, but this is what we're looking for. So I'm going to start with this, and I'm going to copy it. So I've made this now as best I can to be able to read blade config. So if you have some really crazy thing, it may not read it perfectly. But for most of the, I'm going to say 99% of the blade configs that exist out there, this will handle it. And you're going to paste it into this box. You can use the paste from clipboard, or you can just paste it yourself. If you know how to build one from scratch, you can build it from scratch, but we're going to paste it. In pasting it, it's actually going to try to parse that blade config and figure out, first of all, how many blades are there, and then also if you have sub blades, if you have other kind of different ways of doing things, if you've got like a no blade setup, if you're using blade ID, this can handle 2 blade IDs and a no blade, or 3 blade IDs. That's basically all that the tool is able to handle right now. That was what, again, 99% of the configs that I've come across for people are covering. If you don't know what those are, you don't have to worry about them. But the tool is going to do that. So it's going to tell you how many blades it found. So don't worry, it's just letting you know that it was able to find it. If you get an error message here, that means there's something wrong with your blade config, as best the tool can tell. So the tool can't parse out every possible thing. So if you have, again, a really unique or really special case scenario of a blade config, it may return an error. It might be correct, but the tool can't tell you that. But so once that's done, you'll see, let me scroll. Actually, I can't scroll because it has the error message up. So it's going to update the number of blades automatically for me because it was able to read it. So that's what this is telling me. So if I click OK, it added there. And then this number now is going to tell me that it found 2 blades. And that is really the most important piece before you do anything else. Everything else below this tool is going to really just be picking your options, what you want to have enabled, maybe what you want to disable, as well as setting up your presets. But don't start any of that before you get these kind of top pieces of base information in place. Because particularly when it gets to presets, we have to know how many blades you have before we can even start doing presets. And the tool will tell you this, so read everything. So there's a lot of text, I understand it. That's why I made it so you can keep coming back. If you're brand new, I'm providing as much information as I can to not only help you do your blade config, your config file, but explain what's happening, what the choices mean, what they do for you. So anywhere that there's text, read through it. Don't just skip over stuff and guess. I tried to make sure that I have all the information available to you, and then wherever possible, I link out to where there's more information. But we want to get the blade config in place. We want to make sure the number of blades is correct. And then from there, there's going to be some other specific scenarios in this area that you're going to set up. But that's the most important thing, is getting this correct. If you input a blade config that's not formatted correctly, or you're missing something, it will do its best to tell you, but it can't fix that for you. You're going to have to either go back to your installer, or you're going to have to get a correct one. Now, if you're doing your first install, the Proffieboard manual or Frederick's site would be a great way to get updated blade information. So you can use Frederick's site. You can set up, so like right here, I just set up these kind of as a test just to show how the tool works. And then again, you're going to come down to the bottom section, and this is the blade config again. And what will happen is, if I copy this and I paste it into the tool, it's going to, so right now it found 2 blades. This new one's going to have 4 blades because it has the main blade, 2 side blades, and a crystal. So when I paste that, it's going to tell me it was able to find the 4 blades, and then it's going to update my number of blades. But I want to use, for our demo, I'm going to use just the 2 blade setup, so I'm going to go and change it. Now, if you had 2 different sabers, we'll create a brand new config, which I'll show you in a little bit. But oops, go back here. I'm going to paste that one back. I found 2 blades, changes it, update. You don't want to update the number of blades after you started making presets, because changing the number of blades actually forces the presets to be reset, because there has to be a different number of styles. But so always fill out the top first. Then if you have any of these scenarios like a blade detect pin, etc., shared power pins, those are going to typically be listed in your existing config. So again, you want to start with your existing config, particularly if you're brand new, have a brand new saber, and you're going to want to just look for certain things within here. If you don't know what something means, obviously ask about it, but the information is provided. But there's a few things that would be, you'll mark off. And then the last piece is going to be the number of buttons on your saber. And the number of buttons is listed at the top, but what we're going to be interested in, and this is really the last thing you're going to really need your existing config for, as long as you remember your font names, is this section at the bottom, is the config buttons. So if you have a 2-button saber, just choose the 2 button. If you have a 1-button saber, choose the 1 button. And that should usually cover, again, most users, unless your saber had maybe a bad pad, or say the buttons were reversed by your installer. You can, or if you want to change it. So if you have a current power button, if you have a 2-button and you have a power button that's on one side of the saber and an aux button on the other, and you don't like that and you want to flip them, you could do that as well. And what you're going to do is set the pin. So this tool will automatically set what's typically the default for 2-button, but the information exists here. So you can see my power button is right here, and it's telling me which pin is being used. So it says power button pin, and then my aux button is right here, and this is using the aux pin. So if I want to match to my existing config, I just want to make sure these are set. Those are the typical, but say you needed to use a different pin. If I needed to use the aux 2 pin, maybe your installer had to change the wiring or something, or if you want to flip them, you could do that here. But you want to make sure this, if you want your saber to operate the way it did by your installer, you want to make sure, just double check those. And then from there, you're going to go through the information that's available to you, make any updates that you want. You can set all of these things. Any parameter that has a checkbox that's unchecked, that means it's an option you can add. And then you can set values. anything that has a checkbox already in place, those are the typical default defines that would exist in a config. You don't have to use them though. You can disable something. So all of this now is your customization of your Saber. So read through all the options. I put descriptions on what everything means, but you're now able to just go through and you're going to pick and choose what you want. And then at the end, it's going to build your config based on those options. And it's going to have the correct syntax. It's going to make sure you have all the necessary defines. It's also checking to make sure that you don't set up things that conflict with each other. So this tool is doing a lot for you, but it's also trying to show you what's available. And again, these options also change based on the version. So in OS 7, there's obviously a lot more options. If you're in OS 6, your screen may not look the same as this because certain options are only OS 7. And then we've got obviously all these other things. If you don't know what something is, if you don't see it mentioned, like Blade ID, if you don't see it mentioned anywhere in your existing config, it means your Saber's not really using it. You can set it up if you want. Again, anywhere that stuff needs additional explanation, I put in links. You can read up on it. If you have invert boards, so the USB towards would be something. So if your board is pointing a different direction, you can change that. And all of these, just read through all this stuff and make your choices. Now, for OS 7 in particular, I've made a number of changes to my prop file. So by default, this tool is going to use my prop file. If you want to use the default prop file, which is just the simplest button setup, you would just uncheck this box. A lot of these options are going to disappear. But what I've done for OS 7 is based on the feedback from OS 6, I've made a lot of options in a lot of things and features and controls in my prop optional to either be disabled or optional to be enabled. It depends. So certain things in OS 6 were set up as just default. Originally, the assumption was they were things that everybody had been asking for, and I assumed all users would want them. But I did get feedback after OS 6 released from some installers, from users. I saw people run into things that we just hadn't accounted for. So there's going to be a whole new group of disable features in the defines, and I'll go through those in a second. Those are to turn off. So anything you're going to have to check box to disable means that in OS 6 it was just naturally there, part of the prop, but now for OS 7 you can turn it off. And then the opposite now, there's a lot of new features that they're not there by default, but they can easily be added. So you're going to have kind of a combination of enabling certain things and disabling other things. But I've made it so that my prop can go from being the most simple prop possible within reason. So the baseline default prop for ProffiOS is obviously the most stripped down version currently. My props still will have additional features over that one, just because there's a lot of stuff that people want to use either off the bat or eventually want to use, like gestures and stuff. But you can choose whether or not to use those. But so my prop still has more features than the default, but with the defines and these checkboxes, you can actually enable or disable things and get it really stripped down. Or if you're on the other side of the spectrum and you just want all the bells and whistles and you want every crazy thing that I've thrown in there, you'll choose it as well. So there's a lot of new stuff. I'll do a separate video on my prop and get into more explanation on this. But you can any of this stuff features-wise is you just enable it by checking the box. And then any of the disable, so this is particularly anybody who was using the OS 6 prop and had a lot of these features they weren't really using, didn't want. I know some installers wanted to disable certain things like the on-the-fly editing for fonts and styles. I've made that all possible. So you can strip all of those out now with these disable features. So if there's stuff in here that you want to disable, just check the box, it'll disable it. And then all of the other new capabilities, some of these are OS 6, some of these are OS 7. And then I do have control modifications. So some of these were in OS 6, some of these are new to OS 7. What I did for OS 7, OS 6, I brought in SA22C's one-button prop and a few of SA22C's two-button capabilities. So those are considered control modifications. So the hold button for retraction, the hold aux for lockup were from SA22C. And then for OS 7, I took some of the features that BC, Brian Connor, had on his prop that people had wanted, and I added those as well. So the idea being I wanted to make it so that I could try to handle whatever options people wanted, even if they wanted something that was in a different prop, via my prop, to make it so that you can also get the new features. Because a lot of the, particularly a lot of OS 6 stuff, but a lot of the OS 7 stuff, you will need my prop to be able to do it, or you're going to have to go do a lot of individual coding. And I know there's people out there who don't mind that, so by all means. But for the most users, a lot of the new synergy stuff, a lot of the new capabilities of OS 7 that let us really be flexible with the controls and the styles and the different presets, they kind of need to run through my prop to work properly. So that's why I wanted to, considering that a lot of the new features would need my prop, I wanted to make it so my prop was as customizable as possible for everybody, so that everybody who's using something or has different ideas of what their saber should do would still be able to use the prop and get the results they wanted. So I did add a couple of options from BC in here. This one's here, and then there's a couple higher up in selection. So if you have a different prop you've been using and you want to move to OS 7 in particular, definitely check out my prop and check out what you can enable and disable, and then get it to the place where it works like you want. And there's also, if anybody has questions, again, there'll be a separate video on my prop. If you don't see a disable for something that's built into my prop, the reason is actually you can already disable it. It's just how you disable it might be different than a define. So I've had questions about track player. The track player resides by default in my prop, but it requires that your font be set up to use it. So if you don't have a tracks folder within the font itself or the common folder, the track player actually is disabled automatically. But because track player does other things beyond just the track player, it actually, we lean into that technology in a few other places in my prop. Just totally turning it off would actually affect other things that you may want. So track player can't be disabled via define, but if you disable or if you don't include a tracks folder with multiple tracks in it, in your font or in your common folder, the tracks player actually doesn't do anything. And then there's a few other set scenarios like that, certain features that people maybe want or don't want, but they're actually controlled font specifically. They're not controlled universally. So defines are technically universal. If you put a define in to enable or disable something, it's for all uses, for all presets, and for all styles. But a lot of the new stuff in particular is actually controlled at the preset or style level. So you may not see all the disable features or all the enable features that you think you want. But if you have something in particular you don't see here, just ask about it. And then, like I said, I'll go into more description on my prop as a separate video, because there's actually, my prop for OS 7 has so much in it that it'll probably take me a long time just to get it all explained and everything. I've tried to do the documentation already, but there's still a lot more coming. But so you make all your choices, and then we're going to get all the way down to our presets. So like I said, don't set up your presets until you've set up that blade config at the top and you've set up the number of blades. If you change the number of blades, it affects your presets. All right, so now we're going to come down here and we're going to add a preset. And this is the part that'll help you get through. So we're going to add preset. And then actually, oops, hang on, let me do one thing real quick. Refresh that screen. Go. Okay. So I've added my preset, and now you're going to be able to set your style, your preset up. So you're going to want a font. So for those who are brand new to Proffi, the required fields are your font, a track if you want one, and then one style code per blade, as well as a name. Now your font, the font name here has to be identical to the folder on your SD card that contains that font. If you don't know it, look on your SD card. You have to have the correct spelling and the correct case for your individual presets of what font wants to be used. And so as long as you know that, you can set that up. And then for your tracks, you have to know the exact location. So the folder and the name of the default track. Again, this is default track. This is separate from track player. Track player looks at all of the tracks within the track folder of your font or common folder. But you don't have to, if you want a default track, which is actually a different mechanism you would put here. If you don't want a default track and or you don't want track player, don't include the tracks folder in your font. And then you can actually delete this line and it'll put a placeholder in. You do need a placeholder. If you were doing this manually, you'd have to put empty quotations, but the tool will do that for you. And then we're going to get style code. So there's two really easy ways to get style code. if you have your own style you built, if you have styles from older configs, you can put them in here. Just be careful when you're cutting and pasting. So I recommend typically these two tools because they make sure that the syntax is correct. If you're making your own style, or if you're cutting a style from somewhere else and you miss a comma or you miss something else, this tool can't tell you that there's a problem. So you'll get an error when you go to compile, but it's not because of the tool, it's maybe because of your style. But so obviously my library, or if you build your own in editor, right now it's only the OS 6 library. The OS 7 library will be coming out down the line. Obviously we just moved from alpha to beta on OS 7. So really as beta moves along and we get things finalized is when I'll start making the updates to the library. I don't want to make them prematurely because then I might have to redo a bunch of stuff. But so I'm just going to quickly grab like two styles here. So I'll just start with this. You just click Get Style Code, and it's going to put it in your clipboard. And then and you would make all your choices. If you haven't used my library, obviously go research how the library works. And then we'll come back here, and we're just going to paste from clipboard, and it'll put the style in. And then this is actually a good opportunity for me to explain a couple things. So in this saber, I have a main blade, which is blade 1, and I have a little accent strip, which is like 10 pixels. A lot of times people have accent strips, or they have crystal chambers, or they have other, small LEDs that don't do a lot or don't need to do a lot. You can actually save memory on your board if you reuse the style code over. And because of OS 6 in particular, the ability to do style options makes it so that you can use the same code over and over again for a crystal chamber or for an accent strip, but you can have it be completely different colors. You can also choose options for having different animations, but it's still one piece of style code. So I'm going to set up a second preset just ahead of time, and I'm going to show you kind of what I'm going to do here. So blade 2 for me is my accent strip. I'm going to go get an accent style, but I'm going to build it with some options. So I'm going to go into here, accents, and I'm going to, first of all, I want my on behavior to actually be an option list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose custom. And if you're not familiar with the library, go read through all of it. And this lets me build up what an option list is for OS 6 is it lets you actually have one style that can do multiple different things depending on what you choose. And the way you would control it is either through edit mode or through ProffiOS Workbench, or you can update your preset INI file. But I'm going to build out an option list of a couple different options, and I'm just going to really quickly choose a few here. And what this does is it lets this one style actually hold all these different capabilities, and then each preset could have a different capability, but it's using the style code once. And what that does is it saves memory. So particularly if you want to have a lot of presets and you have crystal chambers and accents, building a style option will give you more slots to be able to do more main blade styles, and then just have the accents and crystals kind of do the same thing, but again, with options, you're actually going to build multiple. And you'll see this, it's keeping track here. So I've got 4 unique combinations. I'm going to set up an off behavior. So I can have it so that when it's off, it's just off. I can have, we'll do a turbine. We'll do a battery level bar graph. I'll do a center in graph. And I can set all these different options for what happens while the blade is off. And let's add something else here. Add like a Kyber flow. And what we can do is build these out, all right? And you can actually preview these, right? So right now my saber's off, so this is the off position. If I want to see what fast turbine looks like, that's the fast turbine. So I could set one preset up where the accent's off, one preset where the fast turbine is running while the blade is off. I can have it run the battery level bar graph. And what that does is it's going to be green when it's high. It'll be yellow as the battery drops. And then when it's low, it'll be red. So you can do a battery indicator on your LED strip. And there's a bunch of those. And then we can do different bar graph. And all this is all these options are built into the style so that you can choose them within the preset itself. So this one piece of style code now is going to create 25 unique combos based on the style options that are chosen. Plus, you can also edit all the colors. And the same thing, if I turn the saber on, I've got slow turbine. I can see what the slow run forward looks like. I can see what the heartbeat looks like. I can see what the fast run forward looks like. I can see what Kyber flow up looks like. All right, so that's basically it. So I'm going to build one accent style, but it has, again, 25 options in it, plus all the colors. I'm going to get this style code, and I'm going to paste that for this accent and for this accent. And actually, let's do a third preset. I'm going to paste it for this accent. What that does is, because when you go to compile, the compiler will actually see that the same style code is used 3 times over, and it actually reduces the amount of memory almost to a few bytes, instead of having to create a brand new style for each one. So if I were to, in the library, if I built these 25 combinations uniquely, I would take up a ton of memory within my config file. But by using a style option setup, I actually use very little memory, and I get those 25 combinations because of how the compiler is able to reuse that code over. And we can go into a lot more in depth on that, but I want to get back to this. So I'll cover that more in the future. But so then I would set up the rest of these. So I jumped ahead, but you're going to want to obviously set up your font name and your tracks for all of these. And then we're going to get different blade styles for each of my other main blades. So I'll go back here, and I'm just going to grab really quickly I'll grab one of this. I'll change the color just so I can see that it's a different thing. Grab that style code. And obviously you're going to want to take your time and pick what you really want. And then we'll go, but I'm just running through. And again, because it's going to save, I can come back and do this over a long period of time. So I'll grab an unstable, let's do an unstable in green. We're going to go green just for the fun of it. And again, you also would choose all your other options. So if you're not familiar with a library, definitely take time to look through. There's so many options, plus all the customization you can do. But we'll put that in here. So now I've got just 3 presets set up, but I've got everything done. Again, you'd want to set up, so I'll call this my Luke font. And then I'd want to set up what track I would want. So if you do want a track, you do have to know the location. So that's the font it's in, the folder it's in, and then whatever the name of it is. This is one of the default ones that came with Proffieboard, but you have to get this correct. If this is incorrect, your track's not going to play. And again, default track, separate thing. And then we'll make this my, we'll just call it unstable, whatever. Again, that would have to be whatever the font folder name is, but I'm just doing a demo here. And we'll just call this. And again, I'll just pretend I have a track name, track.wave. All right. And now I've got those built out, and you would build out however many you want. And I want to show you real quick that this is, actually, I'll show you the save in a minute. So now, once you've built out your presets and you're ready to go, we're going to come down here to the bottom, and we're going to generate a full config. And there's a lot of new features built in here. And I know I'm kind of running a little long, so I'm going to go through this part a little quickly. So I'm going to click generate full config, and it's going to build out the config file. Now, if I had made a bunch of option choices and all that up top, this define list would be a lot longer, but it's building all of this out for you. And then we're going to get all our styles and everything in there. Now, what happens with this tool, a brand new thing, is you can actually download your config file directly now, and it's going to format it to a .h for you. So instead of, you can still just do copy config. So if you have an old .h file and you just want to copy and paste this over, you can still use the copy button. But I've added it so you can download this config, and it's going to download it in the name that you set up at the very top. So I'm going to click download config. And then what you would do, for those of you who are new, is you would find where your Proffios folder is on your computer, and you're going to navigate. So I find my Proffios, and I'm going to navigate to the config folder, and then I'm going to save this file in this folder. Now, this, if you see this, it means you already have this file in that folder. So because I just did this already, this means that there's a copy of it. You don't want that at the end of it. Now that, again, really shouldn't happen if this is your first config you're building out. But if you're renaming a file for something that you've already downloaded, just pull that off, because you want to make sure that this is the name you want. But then I would just save this. All right. And then the other thing this tool does now is it gives you what you need to add to your Arduino. And if you're brand new, again, I do have how to update your Proffieboard, but you've created a config file. You just have to tell Arduino to use it. So I'm going to copy this little string here, and this is specific. It's telling me, as long as you put your config in the config folder, which you're supposed to, it's going to tell you what the name is. And then we can come open Arduino, and we would put that in here, right around this spot here. So if I just create a new line and paste. Now, if you're like me and you have a different config setup, you can have multiple listed here. So you'll see there's like all these default ones. You only want one active at a time. So how you would make it so that it's not active is you put these 2 slashes in front. So I can save this one because this is another Saber of mine, but I don't want this one to be used. I want this one to be used. So then this is the new one I just created, assuming I put it in the config folder of the correct version of the OS. I could then go and upload this. And then you would just go through your normal steps. Or if it's your first time, read through here, and this is going to explain, if you click this link, it's going to explain everything step by step for you as well. But I want to really quickly, before we wrap up, the other piece of this tool that I've spent a lot of time on is because of all of the customization, particularly in OS 7, but all the customization now possible for my prop, as well as all of the new things that are coming, particularly new capabilities within styles, I've made it so that this, if you build a config on this tool, it's going to also generate custom documentation specific to your Saber based on the options you've selected. So the first thing would be the preset style option list. And what this does is this breaks out. So if you get a style, particularly from my library, that has options in it, as well as other things that you can control, it's going to allow you to print a document out that tells you, so style, blade 1, style 0, these are the options that have been chosen. Blade 2, style 0, these are the options that have been chosen, etc. And this way, particularly when it comes to the different options that you've set up, it lets you now see what you have built in. And then we can go from there and build that and see all the options that were built in. And you would just print this out and have it available. And then secondly, particularly OS 7, because we can customize what controls are enabled, what are disabled, add new features, you can create a custom button and control list. And again, this is printable, and all these controls are based on the prop you chose, 1 button or 2 button, and what features are currently enabled based on the config you built. And again, printable. So you have, this would be a custom list of what your Saber can do for all the controls. And then lastly is any supported sounds. So my prop has a lot of sounds, particularly there's a lot of new sounds available within OS 7. So this also reads through the options you've selected, and it gives you a custom sound list. That way, if you need to update any older fonts to add new sounds, you know what they need to be named and what they do. So all this documentation now is going to be unique and custom to your Saber based on the config you built. So that's another big piece. And that's not only helpful for brand new users, also if installers want to be able to offer custom controls through the prop and then give a custom control documentation, they can generate those here as well. And then lastly is, as I was saying, so first thing is I can leave this page and come back. So I'm going to just copy my URL real quick. So now it's going to save everything. So I've got everything in here. If I close up this window, go away for a day, come back, and revisit the page, it's going to take a second, but it's going to load all my information back up. So you can come back and you can edit this as many times as you want, make your changes. You can come back in the future, and it'll hold on to everything. So you'll see it'll have all my options set up. All my styles are set up. I skipped over this. I also added the ability, if you forgot what you put in for a preset, you can preview it, and you have all your controls from the library here. So you can see what the basically what's available. And because this is an accent, I would actually just toggle this to be an accent strip. So, but you get the picture now. So if you come back in the future, you forgot what style you loaded, you can preview them. And then, as I said, you can have up to 6 configs. So I'm not gonna build a whole nother one, but all you do is click Add Config, and it's gonna generate another config page. And this is a brand new config. You would again name this one. By default, it's going to tell you it's number 2, but you just give it a new name. So we'll say like my Vader, update it, and then you go through the whole process. And this will let you keep adding up to 6, and then you can go back and forth. So I can go back to my Fallen config, and this is, I can do all the edits on this one, and then let's go look at my Vader config, and then I can do all my edits on this one. Obviously, I haven't done anything on this yet, but you get the picture. You can build out up to 6 and have them all saved and stored and come back to them as many times as you need to, do them over time. But the idea behind it is a tool that will help you and get you through setting up your config, but then also, again, explain all the options, all the defines, all the features, all the controls, everything that's possible with Proffieboard based on the version that you're running. So I will be doing more videos to get more in depth on some of the additional features that are built in here. There's a lot of new capabilities that are actually built into this tool that people maybe aren't familiar with. But in order to kind of keep this as just an intro, I just wanted to get everybody's feet wet. Definitely use the tool. Definitely check it out. If you run into any issues, please report them. Kind of as people use it, that helps me get, work out any bugs that might pop up. And again, always just use the link here to report them. But check it out. Let me know how it's working for you. And I hope you enjoy.